Leo and Travis found Caleb's place in a tired brick building, its hallways smelling of stale grease and damp concrete. They knocked for a long time, but the only answer was the thumping bass from a neighbor's stereo bleeding through the thin walls. Caleb was from around here, but he'd cut ties with his family the day he got out, living on his own since. He was usually an open book, but his past was a locked diary, and neither Leo nor Travis had ever asked for the key. Everyone had chapters they didn't read aloud. Travis stared at the doorknob, his knuckles cracking with impatience as he considered a more forceful approach. It was after 9 at night, and the sound of a splintering door would likely bring the entire building out into the hall. Not a good look. Leo, with his clean-cut appearance, might pass, but Travis, with his close-cropped hair and the intricate ink covering his arms, practically screamed trouble. Travis scratched his head, sizing Leo up with a critical eye. He grumbled, asking if Leo hadn't picked up any useful, less than legal skills during his time away. Leo shot him a sideways glance. I did. Travis's interest was piqued. I learned how to spot an idiot. Travis cursed under his breath and went back to pounding on the door. Leo? Travis? A quiet voice drifted out of the gloom at the end of the hall. Both men spun around. Caleb stood there, clutching a crumpled paper grocery bag, looking like he'd been dragged through a hedge backward. His face was pale, with dark smudges under his eyes, and his clothes were a wrinkled mess. Leo felt a wave of relief. Before he could say anything, Travis strode forward and smacked Caleb hard on the back of the head. The sound echoed in the narrow corridor, sharp and loud. Leo flinched. Are you crazy? Travis roared, his voice shaking with a fury that was just barely contained concern. You couldn't charge your damn phone? Travis didn't know his own strength. He'd once split a solid oak plank for a bet. Caleb winced, covering his head with both hands, his voice small and defensive. He explained he had just gotten back, that he'd been away for a couple of days with no place to charge his phone. Travis wouldn't let it go, demanding to know where he'd been and if he had any idea how worried people were. Leo stepped in, suggesting they take it inside. Caleb, looking completely defeated, fumbled for his keys and let them into the small apartment. Travis was still fuming about Caleb's attitude. Leo put a hand on his arm, telling him to control himself. Travis was a good man, but his temper was a short fuse, the very thing that had landed him in trouble all those years ago. Leo told him to cool off before coming inside. Travis, not yet angry enough to turn on Leo, shot him a dark look before stalking over to the hallway window to smoke. Inside, Caleb sat on the couch, hugging his knees, looking small and lost. Leo went over and gently touched his hair, asking him what had happened. He encouraged him to talk. Caleb wasn't irresponsible. If he said he'd be gone a day, he'd be gone a day. For him to disappear without a word, something must have gone terribly wrong. Caleb remained silent for a long time. Leo didn't push. He saw the bag was full of instant ramen and microwave meals and, looking at Caleb's disheveled state, guessed he hadn't eaten. He offered to make him some soup, pulling a cup from the bag. My mom called me, Caleb said suddenly. She asked me to come home. She said she wanted to see me one last time before she died. Leo froze, the cup of noodles in his hand, and turned back to sit and listen properly. Caleb rubbed his eyes, his voice low as he recounted his family history. His father had died when he was young, and his mother remarried and had another son. He described his mother as a fragile woman, easily swayed, who had rushed into a second marriage out of a desperate belief that any man willing to take on a widow with a child was a blessing. That marriage had been a trap. Caleb's stepfather was a volatile man who took out his frustrations on his wife. As a boy, Caleb would try to intervene, only to be beaten himself, forcing his mother to plead for him, which only brought more humiliation down on her. She had always told him to be quiet, to endure it just like she did. But Caleb couldn't. The older he got, the less he could stand it. His mother saw his resistance not as courage but as rebellion. He felt that she had chosen her new husband over him, that they were a family and he was the outsider. Betrayed, the boy had made the local internet cafe his home, falling in with a rough crowd. He had believed that if she had ever asked for help leaving, he would have done anything, even dropped out of school to support her and his little brother. But she never did. His resentment festered. He hated her weakness, her indecisiveness, and the miserable childhood they had condemned him to. A mother couldn't grasp her son's rage, and a son couldn't comprehend her fear. Before he was 18, Caleb was all sharp edges and fury, lashing out until he landed himself in prison. After he got out, with Leo and Travis's guidance, he'd softened, becoming a little less angry at the world. But he never made peace with his mother, refusing all contact after his release. He thought that was how it would be forever. Maybe if the man died, he'd go back. But not before. Then, 3 days ago, a call came from an unknown number. It was his mother, her voice frantic, begging him to come home for one last visit before she hung up. The line went dead. Alarmed, Caleb had taken a cab to his old house. When he opened the door, he found a scene of carnage. His mother had killed the man with an axe. Caleb hugged himself tighter, his voice a raw whisper as he described the blood-soaked room, the horrific aftermath. Her one last time had been a prelude to her own suicide. He couldn't understand it. Why not just leave? Why throw her own life away after his? All those years of suffering could have been avoided. The story was a shocking swerve from the domestic drama Leo had expected into a full-blown homicide. He was stunned into silence. Caleb explained that he couldn't let her die. He'd convinced her to turn herself in and had spent the last 2 days dealing with the police, with his stepfather's venomous relatives, all while trying to shield his younger brother from the truth. He felt overwhelmed, confessing that at 23, he could barely manage his own life, let alone this catastrophe. Finally, he broke, burying his face in his knees and sobbing like a lost child. Leo's heart ached for him. He moved closer, wrapping an arm around him, patting his back gently. He told him it was okay, that they were there for him. From the doorway, Travis watched, a cigarette dangling from his lips, his expression grim. He had been listening for a while. He looked like he wanted to approach but was frozen by uncertainty. With a frustrated sigh, he blew out a plume of smoke and turned back to the window. After a long while, Caleb looked up, his face streaked with tears. He asked if Leo could do him a favor, adding that it was okay to say no. Seeing him so broken, Leo knew he couldn't refuse. He handed him a tissue and told him to ask anything. Caleb's voice was muffled. He wanted to know if Leo could ask Julian Vance to defend his mother. Leo's hand stilled. Caleb sensed his hesitation and quickly grabbed his arm, promising he would pay. He said he had $20,000 saved, and he'd sign any IOU for the rest, no matter the cost. His eyes were red-rimmed and desperate. He hated her, but he couldn't let her die without a fight. Leo understood, but the problem was Julian. He didn't operate on favors, and Leo had already used his one and only token on Travis's case. Julian had been particularly difficult lately. It might be better for Caleb to ask himself. But faced with Caleb's pleading gaze, Leo found it impossible to say no. He patted the back of Caleb's hand and nodded. "Okay," he said. "I'll talk to him. If he could get Julian to owe him a favor once, he could do it again." After leaving Caleb's, Leo spent a sleepless night strategizing. At 7 the next morning, he called Julian, knowing he would be awake. "I can help you win the Diaz case. In exchange, you do something for me," Leo said the moment the call connected. There was a long pause on the other end. Then Julian's voice, dripping with arrogance, replied, "I was going to win anyway." "I can make you win faster," Leo countered, adding after a beat, "maybe even get you more money." He heard what sounded like a scoff and pressed on, unfazed. "Or, if you don't want my help, the other offer still stands." The breathing on the other end stopped. "That won't be necessary," Julian said, his voice cold. "So you'd rather have my help then? I'll take your silence as a yes." Leo pulled the phone away from his ear. Hello? The signal's breaking up. Hello? He faked a few more seconds of static before quickly hanging up. He stared at the ended call screen and let out a long breath, a mix of relief and irritation. He tossed the phone aside and fell back onto his bed. Leo, how do I look? Mickey, a freelance investigator who spent most of his life on stakeouts, had skin like tanned leather from years of sun exposure. Dressed in a cheap gray-blue work jacket and worn-out sneakers, he looked every bit the part of a man who worked with his hands. Leo adjusted his collar and guided him to a small table. He told him to remember to use a bit of a blue-collar accent. He pointed around the sparsely furnished rental apartment, to the corners of the room and a tissue box on the table, explaining that there were 4 hidden cameras providing complete coverage. He would be watching from the bedroom, so Mickey should feel free to give an award-winning performance. Mickey rubbed his face nervously, remarking that if his current gig didn't work out, maybe he had a future as a character actor. Leo clapped him on the shoulder, reassuring him. The doorbell rang. They exchanged a look. Leo hurried into the bedroom as Mickey called out, "Coming, coming," and went to the door. Leo closed the bedroom door just as he heard Mickey's polite greeting. He sat on the edge of the bed, his eyes fixed on the television screen, which was split into 4 quadrants, each showing a different camera angle. A young insurance agent sat down with Mickey, pulling a thick contract from his briefcase. He explained it was the commercial vehicle policy they had discussed and slid it across the table. He punched numbers into a calculator and showed Mickey the premium. Mickey glanced at the price, then made a show of squinting at the contract. He pinched the bridge of his nose, complaining that the print was too small and his eyes were tired. He waved it away, saying he trusted a big company like there's not to cheat an honest working man, and that he would just sign. The agent, delighted at such an easy sale, quickly produced a pen. He assured Mickey that their company was a top 10 industry leader. He just needed Mickey's driver's license and vehicle registration to fill out the forms. Mickey stood up and started patting his pockets, his brow furrowing deeper and deeper. He searched his jacket, inside and out, but found nothing. After a moment of feigned thought, he gave the agent a sheepish grin. He apologized, explaining he'd had a bit too much to drink at a friend's house the night before and must have left his wallet there. He said they'd have to reschedule. Before the agent could process what was happening, Mickey was pulling him out of his chair and steering him toward the door. The agent, pushed outside, suddenly remembered the contract and asked for it back. Mickey hurried back to the table, grabbed the document, and shot a triumphant wink at one of the hidden cameras. Once the agent was gone, Leo emerged from the bedroom. Mickey stretched and asked if the performance was good enough. Leo said it was, but glancing at the clock, he told him it wasn't comprehensive enough. Mickey paused, confused. Leo explained that one attempt wasn't enough. They needed a pattern. He had scheduled meetings with 5 different agents from the same company that day. Mickey's eyes widened. He held up 5 fingers in disbelief. Leo nodded, adding that there were 5 more scheduled for tomorrow. Mickey collapsed onto the sofa like a deflated balloon, groaning that Leo was working him to the bone and would owe him a very expensive dinner. For 2 solid days, they holed up in that small apartment, hosting a revolving door of insurance agents. 10 different people, all with over 5 years of experience, sat in the same chair and gave the same pitch, trying to upsell Mickey on coverage he didn't need. Each time, Mickey would ask about third-party liability, confirming that if he hit someone, the company would pay. 10 times, he got the same confident yes. Each time, the agent handed him the contract, and each time, Mickey claimed the print was too small to read. Out of the 10 agents, only 2 mentioned the existence of exclusionary clauses, and even they didn't press the issue or explain the details. They all knew that explicitly stating the policy wouldn't cover an overloaded truck would kill the deal, so they kept it vague. If an accident did happen, the contract was all that mattered. Without a recording, it would be Mickey's word against theirs. After Mickey edited the footage, Leo stayed up all night writing an 8,000-word letter of complaint. He had it printed the morning of Mrs. Diaz's second hearing and rushed to the courthouse, the letter and a flash drive with the video in hand. Fearing he'd be late, he called Julian on the way. He could hear the faint sound of wind, as if Julian were walking. Julian confirmed he had just arrived but hadn't seen the opposing counsel. The wind noise stopped as he stepped inside. He asked why Leo was asking. Leo told him he was 5 minutes away and had something important for him. He stressed the word important, begging him to wait by the entrance. The line went dead. Julian had hung up on him. Leo stared at his phone for a second, grinding his teeth, then urged the cab driver to speed up. The driver, sensing the urgency, got him there in 4. Leo tossed a bill onto the seat, jumped out of the car, and sprinted into the courthouse, his heart pounding with the certainty that Julian wouldn't have waited. But he was there, standing just outside the courtroom doors, a solitary figure studying his watch. Leo felt a surge of unexpected hope. Hope that Julian, on some level, trusted him. He ran up, breathless, and handed over the stapled document and the flash drive. "Here," he gasped, pressing a hand to his chest to calm his racing heart. Julian took the file and began flipping through it with practiced speed. His associate, a young female lawyer, leaned in curiously and read the title aloud. "Complaint to the State Insurance Commission regarding employee misconduct, inadequate corporate training, and deliberate obfuscation of contract terms by Apex Insurance?" The commission was the insurance industry's watchdog. An investigation could result in fines far exceeding the $1 million claim. "What's on this?" Julian asked, holding up the flash drive. "Proof," Leo said, his breathing evening out. He showed Julian a censored version of the video on his phone, explaining that the drive had the uncut footage. Julian took the phone, quickly scanning through the video. Without missing a beat, he instructed his stunned associate to request a 5-minute delay from the judge. She nodded numbly and disappeared into the courtroom. "This was your plan?" Julian asked, straightening the papers. "You're going to say it's underhanded and foolish, aren't you?" Leo tapped the complaint letter with a grin. "Sometimes you just have to go for it, win or lose. The important thing is that you tried. It didn't matter if thousands of people said it couldn't be done. If he believed in it, he would do it." Julian looked down at him, his gaze unreadable. He was silent for a long moment. The sound of approaching footsteps broke the quiet. The lawyers and a representative from Apex Insurance were heading their way. "Let me borrow your phone," Julian said and strode towards them. As they passed, Leo whispered, "It's all you." Leo watched from a distance as Julian engaged them in a polite conversation. Suddenly, the representative's expression turned to one of disbelief as he stared at the phone. Julian then handed him the complaint. The man's face darkened as he read, his hand crushing the paper. The other lawyer was speechless, blindsided by the move. Julian leaned in slightly, a gentlemanly smile on his face, and said something Leo couldn't hear. The representative's head shot up, and he nodded frantically. Julian dangled the flash drive, gave a curt nod, and turned to walk back. He paused, remembering the phone, and retrieved it from the representative's hand before continuing his confident stride down the sunlit corridor. The polite smile was gone, replaced by his usual look of cool disdain. He was a king returning from a conquest. "Here," he said, tossing the phone back to Leo. "All settled?" Julian gave him a look that clearly said, "What do you think?" Leo rubbed his nose, feeling foolish. Julian informed him they had agreed to a full internal review, a revision of their contracts, and an increased settlement, on the condition that the video and complaint were never made public. That was fine with Leo. His only goal had been to help Julian win. The case was settled. Apex Insurance paid the original claim plus an additional $600,000 in humanitarian compensation. The truck driver, the second defendant, also agreed to settle for $100,000. From the hallway, Leo could hear Mrs. Diaz's raw, gut-wrenching sobs from inside the conference room. Unlike his own mother's cries of bitter regret years ago, these were tears of release, of catharsis. After so many sleepless nights, the weight of her grief had finally found an answer. The money was a small comfort, but it was closure. She could finally begin to heal. Walking down the long courthouse steps, the warm sun felt like a balm. Felt good. Hopeful. His work was done. "Hey," Leo called out, stopping Julian, who was a few steps below him. Julian paused and looked back. "I need to talk to you." He didn't move, just watched him. The associate tactfully led Mrs. Diaz away. Leo walked down to stand in front of him, finally able to look down at him. "You owe me a favor." "What is it?" Julian asked, not bothering to argue the point. "Caleb needs a criminal defense lawyer. His mother, she's in some trouble. Have him at my office tomorrow at 1. Julian started to turn away. Leo, annoyed by his abruptness, spoke to his back. "By the way, I've always wondered, what were the last things my dad said to you that day he died?" Julian turned his head slightly, his face half in shadow. He was silent for so long Leo thought he wouldn't answer. "All right, forget. If you can't be a good man, that's okay," Julian said slowly. "Just be an ordinary one who doesn't hurt people and isn't hurt by them." Leo froze, the words fitting perfectly with the piece of the memory he held. "Dad believes in you. You'll become a very, very good person. But if you can't be a good man, Dad knew," Leo said, his voice hoarse, staring intently at Julian's face. For his father to have said that, he must have known. He knew that Julian was, yes. He knew, Julian murmured, his eyes downcast. He knew I wasn't normal. Before Leo could react, Julian turned and walked away, his figure shrinking as he descended the steps. Leo watched him go, a storm of emotions churning inside him, and sank onto the steps, suddenly craving a cigarette. He remembered asking his dad what his name meant when he was just a little kid. His father had taken him outside and pointed to a sturdy oak tree. "That's you, Leo," he'd said. Strong and steady. It was summer, and the oak was just another green tree in a sea of green. Felt unremarkable. Leo had complained that it wasn't a very exciting name. His father had just laughed his warm, easy laugh and explained that the tallest, flashiest trees are the first to be blown down in a storm. He said he wanted Leo to be grounded, to be able to withstand life's winds without breaking. Leo's father was like that, a calm, patient man who could spend a whole Sunday afternoon with a cup of tea and a newspaper. His mother was the opposite. Fiery, sharp-tongued, always in motion. He didn't really get it back then, but it sounded important. Then he'd asked about his brother's name. What did Julian mean? His father had thought for a moment and said Julian's name had a special meaning too, but he'd have to show them. The next weekend, his dad woke them both at dawn. He hustled them through brushing their teeth, handed them each a bagel, and pushed them out the door. His mother called after them, asking where on earth they were going. His dad, already halfway down the stairs with Leo in his arms, yelled back, "The ocean." Her disbelieving shriek followed them as they fled. The trip involved a series of stuffy city buses that rattled their bones. By the time they finally saw the gray expanse of the Atlantic, Leo was hot, tired, and regretting the missed Saturday morning cartoons. But his father was already running across the sand, his arms outstretched, scattering flocks of gulls into the air. He called for them to come down. Leo instinctively took Julian's small hand. Julian's face was shadowed by the bright sun behind him. Leo squinted up at him and nodded eagerly. Julian began walking toward the beach. The soft sand was difficult for Leo's small legs, and after a few stumbles, Julian, with a sigh of weary patience, simply scooped him up and carried him. "See those birds, son?" His father called out, breathless and sweating. "Those are gulls. They can fly anywhere. They're free." Leo, his arms wrapped around Julian's neck, whispered, "So many Julians." He heard a short, soft laugh next to his ear, but when he looked up, Julian's face was perfectly blank. His father took him from Julian's arms. "Is your brother a bird? Why are we different?" Leo asked, suddenly unhappy with his own earthbound name. Julian means youthful and bright, his dad explained, not caring if a 5-year-old understood. He ruffled Julian's hair with his free hand. The person who named you must have wanted you to be free, untouched by the dirt of the world. Julian's expression didn't change. He just stared at the birds. Then why did they give me away? His dad's smile faltered. He gently set Leo down and knelt to be at eye level with Julian. Why do you think they gave you away? Maybe they just couldn't keep you. It's not the same thing, is it? That was his dad's gift. An unshakable optimism, a trait Leo had inherited. Julian looked stunned into silence. Go on, Leo. Take your brother to the water, his father urged. Leo grabbed Julian's hand and pulled him toward the waves. Julian let himself be dragged into the shallow surf, where their dad promptly splashed him. Julian's face darkened instantly. Leo, instinctively protective, scooped up a handful of water and threw it right in his dad's face, avenging his brother. Don't bully him, he yelled. His dad lunged for him, and Leo shrieked, hiding behind Julian. Julian picked him up and ran back toward the shore, and when he looked back over his shoulder, his smile was brilliant and real. It was the most carefree moment of Leo's life. The next afternoon, Leo met Caleb and they went to Julian's law firm, arriving early. Caleb, looking slightly better but still drained, thanked Leo profusely. Leo playfully pinched his cheek and told him there was no need for thanks between them, ruffling his hair just as the conference room door opened. Julian and his associate, Will, stood there, their gazes fixed on Leo's hand on Caleb's face. First, he was seen embracing another man on the street, and now he was caught flirting with a younger boy in Julian's office. He had a feeling his reputation was about to change from boss's brother to serial cradle robber. He quickly retracted his hand and put some distance between himself and Caleb. Will cleared his throat, his smile a little strained, and introduced himself before gesturing for them to begin. After they were all seated, Leo gave Caleb an encouraging pat on the shoulder. Caleb, though outwardly calm, was a wreck inside. He took a deep breath and began to recount the events, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. Julian leaned back on the sofa, arms crossed, with an air of profound impatience. But Leo knew he was listening. When Julian committed to something, he did it properly, regardless of his personal feelings. Caleb repeated the entire story. When he finished, he looked at Julian, his voice trembling. Will my mom get the death penalty? No, Julian said flatly. A history of long-term abuse and a voluntary confession rules that out. With a guilty plea, she's looking at a sentence of no more than 20 years. 20 years? Caleb was aghast. But it was self-defense. She killed a monster, not a man. 20 years was a life sentence for a woman his mother's age. Julian's expression was unmoved. There is no law stating that monsters deserve to die, he said coldly. The law exists to maintain social order. We have rules. Those who break them face consequences. Will tried to intervene, but Julian continued, his voice cutting. A good person is beaten by a bad person. The good person kills the bad person and is then punished by the law. You're telling me about rules? What if, Caleb said, his eyes flashing as he suddenly looked at Leo, what if that good person was someone you loved? What if it was Leo? Could you still be so detached? Leo's blood ran cold. The kid had no idea how precisely that question hit its mark. He instinctively looked at Julian. Julian was looking at him too. Their eyes met. For a fraction of a second, something flickered in Julian's eyes. A ghost of an emotion Leo couldn't name, before it was replaced by pure scorn directed back at Caleb. Then what would you have me do? He asked, his gaze shifting away from Leo. Fight for an acquittal, Caleb said, his fists clenched. She didn't commit a crime. She saved her own life. Julian let out a short, derisive laugh. You're hopelessly naive. If that's your position, I can't help you. Find another lawyer. He stood up. We'll show them out. Without another glance, he walked out of the room. Will looked apologetically at them. Caleb's face was ashen. He grabbed Leo's arm, his bravado gone, pleading with him to talk to Julian again. He was desperate, explaining that his mother wouldn't survive 20 years in prison. Leo sighed, patting his hand. He told Caleb to wait there and follow Julian to his office. Julian was standing by the panoramic window, his back to the door, clearly expecting him. Leo walked to the desk and told him that Caleb was just scared and didn't mean to challenge him. He was talking about his mother. Julian didn't move. Leo gritted his teeth and came around the desk to face him. "You owe me this. Don't tell me you're backing out now." Julian finally looked at him, his voice soft. "You want me to understand him? You, of all people, should know I lack the capacity for that. I have no conscience, no empathy. I don't feel sorrow for others' suffering. What is there for me to understand?" He wasn't being argumentative. He was genuinely asking. For some reason, hearing him say it so plainly made Leo's heart ache. He knelt down, his hands resting on Julian's ankles. "Then don't understand," he said, his voice wheedling. "Just take the case. Do your feet still hurt?" Julian didn't pull away. He just looked down at him with a weary expression. "You're remarkably good to your friends. A normal person as loyal as you is a rare find these days." Leo ignored the sarcasm. "Of course. Anyone would be lucky to have me as a friend. Or a lover." A faint smile touched Julian's lips. "Your parents must have had a difficult time, raising such a disobedient and annoying child." The jab hit its mark. Leo straightened up, his own smile gone. "Are you going to help him or not?" "Stay away from me for 1 month." That was his price. Leo hesitated. A month felt like an eternity. He argued that he needed to be involved in Caleb's case. "Fine," Julian said, his eyes drifting down to Leo's hands on his ankles. "Same rules as before. You can be present, but you will not offer opinions, you will not touch me, and you will not object to my decisions." Leo quickly raised his hands in surrender. "Deal. I'll go get Caleb." At the door, he paused. "By the way, I had a dream about Dad last night." He didn't look back. "He wanted me to tell you that you're doing a good job, and that he's proud of you." He left the room, silently apologizing to his father's memory for using him like a pawn. It was a low blow, but it was the only weapon that had ever worked on Julian. Julian claimed to have no conscience, but he was trying to live up to their father's last wish. He had built a fortress around the monster inside him, and Leo knew his own presence constantly rattled the cage. He was the one person who knew Julian's secret. Of course, Julian hated him. He was a living reminder of the very abnormality Julian fought every day to suppress. Half an hour later, Caleb emerged from the conference room looking like he'd seen a ghost. He told Leo that Julian had agreed to aim for an acquittal but might pursue a plea bargain if the conditions were right. Leo clapped him on the back, telling him to trust his brother. That evening, Leo took Travis, Mickey, and Caleb out for burgers and beer to repay Mickey for his help. It was a loud, smoky sports bar. Caleb barely ate, focusing on his beer. Mickey tried to lighten the mood with celebrity gossip, but the tension was thick. Travis warned Mickey to be careful not to get arrested again. Mickey just grinned mysteriously and said he was working on a huge story, something that would shake the city. By the end of the night, Caleb was drunk. Travis insisted on taking him home so they could have a talk. Leo was skeptical about the wisdom of two drunk men having a heart-to-heart, but Travis was stubborn. He let Mickey drive them both home, a decision he would soon regret. The next afternoon, Caleb didn't show up for work. Leo figured he and Travis were hungover and called once, but neither answered. Around 5, Travis called, his voice frantic, asking if Leo had seen Caleb. Leo was confused. He thought they were together. Travis stammered that Caleb had run off and wasn't answering his phone. When Leo asked what happened, if Travis had yelled at him again, there was a long, guilty silence. Leo hung up and tried Caleb's number. He picked up on the third ring. He was clearly avoiding Travis. "Where are you?" Leo asked. "Downstairs from my apartment. Caleb mumbled, his voice thick with emotion. He sounded like he'd been crying. Leo texted Travis to let him know Caleb was downstairs. Caleb didn't say anything for a long moment. Leo, he said suddenly, do you remember what I told you in the showers that time, back inside, after you saved me? Leo's mind went blank. That was 5 years ago. I told you I appreciated you helping me, but if you did it because you wanted to sleep with me, I'd beat the hell out of you too. The memory came flooding back. Leo had been both amused and embarrassed, and had assured him he had no interest in him. He was only interested in one person. Why are you bringing this up now? Leo asked, a sense of dread creeping over him. I just want to say it again. I hate guys like that. If anyone ever tried that with me, I'd kill them, Caleb said, his voice a mixture of fury and tears. If something happens, I don't want you to blame me. Leo's mind raced, connecting the dots. Travis and Caleb's talk. Travis's evasiveness. Caleb's rage and his couldn't be. Just then, he heard Travis's voice in the background of the call. Caleb, listen to me, I can explain. There was a clatter, the sound of the phone dropping, followed by shouting and the sickening thud of fists hitting flesh. Travis's desperate explanations were drowned out by Caleb's enraged curses. I treated you like a brother. What do you think I am? Leo had never heard Caleb speak to Travis like that. He'd always looked up to him. For him to lash out this way, something fundamental must have been broken. Leo yelled into the phone, but the line was a chaotic mess of violence. He grabbed a cab and raced to Caleb's apartment. When he arrived, Travis was sitting on the front steps, a dark bruise blooming on his cheekbone. Caleb was nowhere in sight. Travis offered him a cigarette, and they sat in silence for a long time, the smoke curling between them. Finally, Travis spoke. He confessed that the story he'd told Leo about his old business partner had been a lie. He wasn't my best friend, Travis said, his voice heavy with shame. He was my lover. Leo stared at him, speechless. Travis wouldn't meet his eyes. I get it if you're disgusted, he mumbled. I'm just tired of pretending. He then admitted that he'd gotten drunk the night before, and in a moment of weakness, he'd kissed Caleb and things had gone further. Leo closed his eyes, feeling the world tilt on its axis. He asked where Caleb was. Upstairs, Travis said. He told me to never show my face again. Leo sighed. Caleb was already on edge. This was the last thing he needed. He told Travis to give him space. As they walked away from the building, Leo decided it was his turn to be honest. He stopped and told Travis that he wasn't into men or women. He was only in love with his brother. Travis's expression was a mirror of Leo's own shock from moments before. After that, Caleb took a leave of absence from work, claiming he needed to focus on the trial. He sounded calmer over the phone, but he never mentioned Travis. With time on his hands and Julian off limits, Leo found himself bored. He remembered the membership card he'd bought off the girl at the pawn shop and decided to check out the boxing gym. It was a clean, spacious facility. A lean, wiry trainer named Joe was assigned to him. He introduced Leo to another new student, a young woman with a high ponytail and a bubbly smile. Mimi, she said, shaking his hand. You can call me senior sister. I've taken 3 more classes than you. Leo, amused, agreed. Joe started them on basic stances and punches. Halfway through, Mimi asked when their senior brother was coming. Joe corrected her, saying Mr. Vance was not someone he felt qualified to teach. Mimi gushed that Julian was coming today. Her face flushed with excitement as she declared that now that he and her cousin were broken up, she was free to pursue him. Leo pieced it together. Julian's ex-fiancée was Isabel. This girl, Mimi, was her cousin. It was a small world. He watched her, a young woman full of daring and hopeless romanticism, and saw a reflection of his younger self. During a stretching exercise, Mimi was pressing down on Leo's back, trying to loosen his impossibly tight hamstrings. You're so stiff, she grunted. Careful with your wording, senior sister, Leo gasped, the stretch agonizing. Just as he was about to tap out, Mimi's voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "Oh my God, he's here. Look, isn't he gorgeous?" Leo propped himself up and followed her gaze. He saw the flash of familiar red hand wraps, then the cool, handsome face of Julian Vance. He was already in the ring, warming up with Joe. Julian must have felt his stare because he looked over. His eyes narrowed slightly in recognition and annoyance. Leo couldn't help but smile. This wasn't his doing. It was fate. He gave Julian a little wave. Mimi, thinking the look was for her, let out a small squeak of excitement and waved back timidly. Julian ignored them both and began his workout. He moved with a lethal grace, his punches and kicks landing with brutal precision. He was incredible. Mimi was practically swooning beside him. After one particularly powerful kick sent Joe stumbling backward, she decided against her fantasy of holding the pads for him. Later, in the locker room, as Leo was toweling off after a shower, an arm shot out from behind him and slammed his locker door shut. He felt a body press against his back, radiating an intense heat. "You're following me again." Julian's voice was a low growl in his ear. Leo, bound by their agreement not to speak, just shook his head. "It hasn't even been a week," Julian murmured, his breath warm against Leo's skin. The sensation sent a shiver down his spine. He leaned forward, resting his forehead against the cool metal of the locker to steady himself. Julian's hand moved from the locker to the back of his neck, his fingers surprisingly cool against Leo's heated skin. The touch was electric, and a low sound escaped Leo's throat. His own body was betraying him, trembling slightly. "It has to be you," Leo whispered, breaking their pact. He heard a soft, disbelieving scoff. The hand on his neck tightened for a second before Julian pressed closer, his lips brushing Leo's ear. Just as he was about to speak, the sound of voices from outside the locker room made him pull back. He was gone without another word. On the day of the trial, it was raining. Leo found Caleb already seated in the courtroom. On the other side sat his stepfather's family, their faces grim. Caleb whispered that his younger brother would be testifying for the prosecution. The boy had been taken by his paternal grandparents after the incident, and Caleb hadn't been allowed to see him. His stepfather's family was demanding $1 million settlement in exchange for a letter of leniency. The trial began. The prosecutor painted a picture of Caleb's mother, Yao Jing, as a cold-blooded killer who had plotted to murder her husband. Then Julian stood up. He spoke of a 16-year history of brutal domestic abuse, reframing the act not as murder, but as a desperate act of self-preservation. He argued that on the night of the incident, her husband, Tang Zhipeng, had been drunk and violent, and she had fought back to save her own life. "You're a liar," Tang's brother screamed from the gallery, and the family erupted in chaos, throwing wadded-up paper at Julian. The judge had the bailiffs remove the most disruptive members. When Caleb's younger half-brother, a quiet, pudgy boy named Tang Jua, took the stand, Caleb tensed. The boy testified that he'd never seen his father hit his mother. Yao Jing, who had been numb throughout the proceedings, finally broke down, burying her face in her hands and sobbing. On cross-examination, Julian was relentless. He brought up an incident on the boy's birthday the previous year, a night when his mother had ended up in the emergency room with 5 stitches in her head. The boy claimed not to remember. Julian pressed him, asking how he could forget such a significant day, but the boy just repeated, "I don't remember," his voice cracking. After the session, the prosecutor requested a meeting to discuss a plea bargain. As they were leaving, Tang's family confronted them. His brother got in Caleb's face, calling him a murderer's son. Leo stepped between them before a fight could break out. In the crowd, the younger brother, Tang Jua, looked back at Caleb with a pained, conflicted expression before being led away. Outside, Leo ran into an old acquaintance, a prosecutor named Meng Shenjun. She gave him the phone number of a retired prison guard, an old man named Huang, whom Leo had wanted to thank for testifying in a previous case. Leo called him immediately, and they arranged to meet for dinner that night. At a smoky barbecue joint, Leo and old Huang caught up. The conversation eventually turned to past cases, and Huang mentioned something odd. He said he'd seen a man at the courthouse whom he recognized. For years, this man would come to the prison where Leo had been held. He'd never go inside, just stand outside the gates for hours, smoking. Huang said he was handsome like a movie star. This year, though he hadn't seen him, a cold premonition washed over Leo. A handsome man at that specific courthouse who used to stand outside his prison for years. He pulled out his phone and showed Huang a candid photo he had once taken of Julian. "Is this him?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. Huang squinted at the screen. "Yeah, that's him." The world seemed to fracture around Leo. For 10 years, he had believed Julian didn't care, that he had been completely forgotten. But what if that wasn't true? He drank too much that night. The alcohol unspooled his memories, pulling him back 10 years to the day it all went wrong. He remembered the elation of Julian finally answering his call after 2 months of silence. He had been so desperate for contact. But Julian's voice was as cold as ever. He told Leo to stop sending the messages. He said he hadn't read them, didn't need them. The joy drained out of Leo, replaced by a familiar ache. He begged to see him just once. After a long, agonizing silence, Julian had said something strange. "When you have truly seen fear, you will no longer approach the abyss." Then he agreed to meet. The next day, 5 o'clock, at the abandoned construction site, their childhood hiding spot. The next morning, Leo was about to leave early when he got a call from an unknown number. It was Chiang, his nemesis, the obsessive rival for Julian's attention. He was taunting him, telling him he'd read all of Leo's pathetic messages. Then he revealed he knew about the meeting, the time, and the place. Leo's blood ran cold. Had Julian told him? Why? Chiang's voice was like poison, whispering that Julian had asked him to be there. He baited him, telling him to come early if he wanted answers. He said he was waiting. Driven by a terrible fear, Leo grabbed a switchblade he kept in a drawer and left. He found Chiang on the top floor of the skeletal building. Chiang smiled, telling Leo that Julian had set them both up. He claimed Julian wanted him to kill Leo to get rid of both of his problems at once. The words were insane, but they resonated with Leo's deepest insecurities. Enraged, Leo attacked him. They fought brutally, a desperate struggle on the dusty concrete. Chiang was stronger, wrapping a rebar around Leo's neck, choking him. As Leo's vision started to black out, the switchblade fell from his pocket. He grabbed it and blindly stabbed, forcing Chiang to release him. The fight escalated. Chiang, bleeding but manic, swore he would never let Julian go, that he would drag him into the abyss with him. The thought of Julian being haunted forever by this madman terrified Leo more than his own death. In a final, desperate surge, he plunged the knife into Chiang again. They grappled near the edge of the unfinished floor. Chiang was laughing, telling him he could never protect Julian forever. "I can," Leo snarled, and with a final shove, sent him over the edge. He watched him fall, watched him die. Then his phone buzzed. It was a text from Julian. "Don't be late." The police arrived. Witnesses had seen the fight. The knife was his. The motive was clear. He was sentenced to 10 years for murder. 10 years without a single visit, a single letter from Julian. Now, stumbling through the night, drunk and reeling from Huang's revelation, he found himself outside Julian's apartment building. The security guard, seeing his state, was reluctant to let him in, but Leo managed to slur Julian's apartment number. The guard buzzed, and Leo lurched toward the intercom. "Bro, it's me," he yelled, just before doubling over to be sick in the bushes. A few minutes later, Julian appeared, looking soft and sleep-rumpled in a t-shirt and flip-flops, his expression murderous. "You live like a maggot," he said. Normally, the words would have cut him to the bone. Tonight they felt like a love song. He grinned foolishly. You came to get me. He collapsed against him, all dead weight. Julian, with a long-suffering sigh, half-dragged, half-carried him into the apartment and dumped him on the plush living room carpet. Leo grabbed his ankle, whining that he was thirsty. Julian pulled his leg free and walked away. Leo's heart sank. But then the footsteps returned. A glass of water was placed on the floor beside him. The bedroom door clicked shut. Leo sat up, a giddy, idiotic grin spreading across his face. He drank the water. It was the sweetest thing he'd ever tasted. He lay on the carpet, too happy to sleep, his head full of pink, bubbly thoughts. He noticed the 2 rolls of red hand wraps by the punching bag. His gut told him one of them was the one he'd used days ago, the one Julian should have thrown away. He was keeping it, just like he had kept watch outside the prison gates for 10 years. The next morning, sunlight woke him as Julian, dressed for work, pulled the wraps from his face. He kicked Leo's side lightly. Get up. Go home. Leo feigned sleep. Julian kicked him again, then gave up. Be gone when I get back, he said, and left. The moment the door locked, Leo sprang up. He was alone in Julian's sanctuary. He explored freely, finally entering the one room Julian had always kept locked. He keyed in the code he'd memorized from the front door, and it opened. The room was dark. When he found the light switch, he gasped. The walls were covered in his own letters from prison, hundreds of them. Scrawled over them in huge, violent red letters like streaks of blood were the same 2 phrases over and over. Do not go near him. Stay away from him. They were a frantic, desperate mantra. Not to others, Leo realized, but to Julian himself. This room wasn't a shrine to hatred. It was a cage. A self-made prison built to contain a monster, and Leo was the one thing the monster wanted.